South Africa. A land of sunshine and struggle, of breathtaking beauty and deep-seated pain. It's a land where the very words used to describe its people tell a story of power and dispossession. Take the word Afrikaner, a word claimed by some, contested by others. It's a word heavy with history, dripping with the legacy of colonialism. Afrikaners, we're told, are white South Africans, descended mainly from Dutch, German and French settlers. They arrived on African shores centuries ago, bringing with them their languages, their customs, their sense of entitlement. Over time, they forged a new identity, a hybrid of European roots and African soil. They called themselves Afrikaners. Africans, laying claim to a land that had already been claimed. But the true Africans, the indigenous people of this land, have a different story to tell. They speak of ancient lineages stretching back millennia, of deep connections to the land, of cultures that flourished long before the arrival of European ships. To them, the word Afrikaner rings hollow, a stolen name that masks a history of conquest and dispossession. It's a tale as old as time itself. The colonizer arrives, claims ownership of the land and rewrites history to suit his narrative. He becomes the native, the rightful heir, while the true children of the soil are relegated to the margins, their voices silenced, their stories erased. Let's be clear. Afrikaners are not indigenous to Africa. They are the descendants of settlers who came to this continent seeking fortune, fleeing persecution, or driven by the insatiable hunger for land and power that has fueled empires for centuries. Their history in South Africa is inextricably intertwined with the dispossession and oppression of the indigenous African population. The arrival of Europeans in South Africa marked the beginning of a long and brutal chapter in the nation's history. From the moment Jan van Riebeeck established a Dutch trading post at the Cape of Good Hope in 1652, the indigenous people of South Africa were subjected to violence, displacement and systematic discrimination. The Dutch East India Company, driven by profit and greed, saw South Africa as a source of cheap labour and natural resources. They dispossessed indigenous communities of their land, forcing them into servitude and creating a system of racial hierarchy that would shape South African society for centuries to come. As more Europeans arrived, the pressure on indigenous communities intensified. Wars were fought, treaties were broken, and land was stolen. The indigenous people of South Africa were pushed further and further inland, their traditional ways of life disrupted, their cultures threatened with extinction. Ernst Roets, the former deputy CEO of AfriForum and current head of the Afrikaner Foundation, has become a vocal proponent of the narrative of Afrikaner victimhood. He paints a picture of a community under siege, targeted for their race and their history. At the heart of his claims are the so-called farm murders, a term used to describe the killings of farmers in South Africa. Roets and his ilk would have you believe that these murders are part of a systematic campaign of violence against white farmers driven by racial hatred and a desire to drive them off their land. They point to statistics often taken out of context to support their claims, fueling a climate of fear and paranoia among Afrikaners. However, a closer look at the data reveals a different story. While farm murders are a tragic reality in South Africa, they are not the racially motivated epidemic that Roets and his supporters make them out to be. In fact, farm murders account for a tiny fraction of overall murders in South Africa, and the victims are just as likely to be black farm workers as white farm owners. The truth is that crime in South Africa is a complex issue rooted in poverty, inequality, and the legacy of apartheid. To reduce it to a simple narrative of black-on-white violence is not only disingenuous but also dangerous. It ignores the very real challenges facing all South Africans regardless of race and perpetuates a divisive and harmful rhetoric. Roets's vision for Afrikaner self-determination bears striking similarities to the ideology that fueled the Zionist movement and the creation of the State of Israel. Both are rooted in a belief in the inherent right of a particular group to claim ownership of land based on historical and religious narratives, often at the expense of the indigenous population. Just as Zionist leaders pointed to the biblical connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel to justify their claim, Roets and his supporters evoke a romanticized history of Afrikaner pioneers taming the African wilderness to legitimize their own sense of entitlement to the land. They speak of a volk, a people bound by blood and soil, who have nowhere else to go. They claim to be as African as any other group, ignoring the fact that their very presence in South Africa is a result of colonial conquest and the displacement of indigenous communities. This narrative of belonging through dispossession is eerily familiar to anyone who has followed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a story of settlers claiming the mantle of indigeneity, justifying their actions through a combination of historical revisionism and religious zeal. Section 5. Orania, a mirage of exclusivity in a shared land. The town of Orania, nestled on the banks of the Orange River in the arid heartland of South Africa, stands as a stark reminder of the enduring legacy of apartheid. It is a self-proclaimed whites-only enclave, a bastion of Afrikaner nationalism where the old South African flag still flies and the dream of a racially separate state lives on. Founded in 1991 on the eve of South Africa's transition to democracy, Orania was intended as a refuge for Afrikaners who feared retribution for the sins of apartheid. They sought to create a community where they could preserve their language, their culture, and their way of life, free from the perceived threat of black majority rule. Today, Orania is home to around 2,000 people, almost all of whom are white Afrikaners. The town is run according to a strict interpretation of Christian values and Afrikaner cultural norms. Black people are allowed to enter Orania as workers, but they are not permitted to live there permanently or to own property. Orania is often held up by its proponents as a model of Afrikaner self-sufficiency and a testament to their ability to thrive independently. However, critics view it as a racist relic of the past, a monument to white privilege and a rejection of the principles of equality and reconciliation upon which post-apartheid South Africa was founded. Section 6. The American Gaze. Selective sympathy and historical blind spots. The United States, a nation founded on the principles of liberty and equality, has a long and complicated history with race. From the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow to the ongoing struggle for racial justice, the issue of race has been a defining feature of the American experience. Yet, when it comes to South Africa, the US has often displayed a selective sympathy, siding with the descendants of European settlers while turning a blind eye to the plight of black South Africans. This double standard is evident in the support that figures like Ernst Roets have received from certain quarters in the United States. Right-wing media outlets have provided a platform for Roets to spread his message of Afrikaner victimhood, often without challenging his claims or providing context. This sympathetic ear is in stark contrast to the skepticism and hostility often directed at black activists and intellectuals who dare to speak out about systemic racism and inequality in the United States. The Trump administration's 2025 executive order offering refugee status to Afrikaner farmers is perhaps the most blatant example of this selective sympathy. The order, based on the false premise that Afrikaners are facing persecution in South Africa, was widely condemned as racist and hypocritical. It exposed the deep-seated biases that continue to shape US foreign policy, particularly when it comes to issues of race and colonialism. Section 7. The audacity of innocent Afrikaner claims of victimhood. The narrative of Afrikaner victimhood is a dangerous and disingenuous one. It seeks to rewrite history, portraying Afrikaners as innocent bystanders, caught in the crossfire of South Africa's turbulent past. It ignores the central role that Afrikaners played in the establishment and maintenance of apartheid, a system of racial segregation and oppression that left millions of black South Africans impoverished, disenfranchised and traumatized. The claim that Afrikaners are being persecuted in post-apartheid South Africa is simply not supported by the evidence. While there have been isolated incidents of violence against white farmers, these crimes are not part of a systematic campaign of racial targeting. In fact, Afrikaners continue to enjoy a privileged position in South African society, holding a disproportionate share of the country's wealth and land. The real victims in South Africa are the millions of black South Africans who continue to bear the brunt of the country's legacy of racial inequality. They are the ones who live in poverty, who lack access to quality education and healthcare, and who are still fighting for economic justice and social inclusion. To claim that Afrikaners are the ones being persecuted is not only insensitive, but also a dangerous distortion of reality. Section 8. The Unheard Pleas of African Americans. The selective sympathy shown towards Afrikaners by some in the United States stands in stark contrast to the often dismissive attitude towards the struggles of African Americans. While Afrikaner claims of victimhood are amplified and validated, the legitimate grievances of African Americans are often downplayed, dismissed, or met with outright hostility. The fight for racial justice in the United States has been a long and arduous one. From the civil rights movement to the Black Lives Matter movement, African Americans have been fighting for equal rights and an end to systemic racism for generations. Yet their demands for equality are often met with resistance, backlash, and accusations of playing the race card. The contrast in how the struggles of Afrikaners and African Americans are perceived reveals a deep-seated bias, a willingness to empathize with the descendants of European colonizers, while turning a blind eye to the plight of those who continue to suffer the legacy of colonialism and slavery on American soil. It's a reminder that the fight for racial justice is far from over, both in South Africa and in the United States. Section 9, Africa's Soul, a tapestry woven by all her children. Africa's story is not a simple one. It is a story of immense complexity, of beauty and pain, of triumph and tragedy. It is a story woven together by the countless threads of its people, their histories, their cultures, their dreams. To reduce this rich tapestry to a simplistic binary of us and them, of native and settler, is to do a disservice to the continent's past and to diminish its future. South Africa, in particular, stands at a crossroads. The wounds of apartheid run deep, and the legacy of colonialism continues to cast a long shadow over the nation. Yet there is also hope. There is a new generation of South Africans raised in the shadow of Mandela's dream of a rainbow nation who are determined to build a more just and equitable society for all. The path forward is not an easy one. It will require honesty, empathy, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths of the past. It will require...
Hey everyone, let's dive into a tale of two struggles for self-determination, but with a stark twist. In Atlanta, Marcus sits in a library, flipping through an old book by Moses Hess. A quote catches his eye. "A people without a homeland is doomed to wander." Hess wrote this in 1862, arguing that Jews needed Palestine to escape European anti-Semitism, a call for dignity and survival. Marcus's phone buzzes. Tucker Carlson's show. Ernst Roets, an Afrikaner activist, claims a genocide against white South Africans under ANC policies. Carlson nods, gravely warning America. Days later, President Trump offers Afrikaners refugee status and cuts aid to South Africa. Marcus scoffs. Self-determination for them, but not for us? His grandmother spoke of the Republic of New Africa, a 1960s vision for black self-determination in America's South. Marcus fights for reparations, economic justice, an end to systemic racism. Demands echoing Hess's Jews. Yet no senator champions their cause. No TV host amplifies their voice. Meanwhile, in Stellenbosch, Johan, an Afrikaner vineyard owner, watches Carlson's segment. His family thrived under apartheid, a history he sidesteps. Roets's talk of a threatened Afrikaner nation resonates, mirroring Hess's call for a people to claim their soil. Johan feels America's support as a lifeline, unaware it drowns out others' cries. Marcus posts on social media. Hess said nations need a homeland to survive. Why do Afrikaners get America's ear while black Americans beg for justice? Replies flood in. One reads, "It's the European descent. US picks its victims by race." In DC, a congressman drafts a bill to protect South African whites. Marcus's friend, pitching a black reparations plan, gets a polite rejection. Hess's words echo in Marcus's mind. Without a homeland, a people's soul is lost. As Marcus leaves the library, the TV blares Carlson South Africa's a warning. Marcus whispers, "So is America's silence." The hypocrisy burns. A tale of two nations, one heard, one ignored, divided by history and the shadow of race. Whose fight for self-determination deserves a voice? Comment below and share this story.
I think what a better response from the US could be is to take a firm stance against what is happening in terms of what the South African government is doing, but then to say how can the US support minority groups in South Africa who are really working for some form of self-determination. I think America should recognize that it does have part in the problem in terms of what happened historically.
Are you kidding? Yes, it does. Big time.
Yes, and therefore it's reasonable, and I think it's fair, and I'm hesitant to say this because I'm not an American, but I think it's reasonable to say that America has some form of a moral responsibility. Not to fix South Africa, but at least to try to rework this mess that has been created, because it was involved in creating this mess.
We've mobilized our State Department to defend, quote, trans rights in the Donbass, okay? We've waded into every sectarian conflict in this world for the past 80 years. Yeah, I think we can certainly say that a minority group targeted for genocide in a country we've been involved in really intimately for my entire life, that group has a right not to be killed and to have some measure of self-determination. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
That's not too big a
Absolutely,
deal,
yes.
right?
Yeah, and the solution, I would say the most sustainable solution is to help such communities to govern themselves, to have self-determination. And it's not only obviously it would be in our interest, but I think it's also in the interest of the West and of America.
Just on principle, like every other group in the world has the right to its own homeland except white people? Like what?
Yeah.
Like tell me, just explain to me how that makes sense. Either no group has the right or every group has the right.
Yep.
It's really that simple. And if you want to say no group has the right, okay. You might even convince me. I don't know. I'm not a race guy, actually, by my temperament at all. I'd kind of like to ignore it. But as long as some groups have a right to self-determination, then every group has a right.
Yep.
It's that simple.
Yes.
And if there's a special carve-out where one group doesn't have a right, you have to explain to me why that group doesn't have that right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that fair?
No, it's absolutely fair. Well, I think South Africa is a
What? I mean, what the hell why are we playing along with this nonsense?
Yeah, it's this narrative has become this massive stream that is turned into rapids on a river that just pulls everyone along. And this narrative just says if you're white, then there's inherently something wrong with you.
It doesn't make any sense, and it's leading toward a really bad conclusion, obviously, as it has for every other group targeted in this way has really suffered in and there are a lot of them, okay? It's not, there are a lot of them.
Yep.
And it never ends up well. And I just don't know why we're playing along where you're not even allowed to say, oh, you haven't been. I don't care anymore, obviously. But again, either every group has right to self-determination or no group does. You can't have this system where, some groups do or all groups do but one. No. It's all or nothing on this.
Yeah,
I have listened to your leader, at least on one occasion in convention here. It was 2 years ago, and at that time he advocated the separate state proposition of giving the what you call the so-called American Negro a separate state in which to live, to make their own way. Would you explain that philosophy, please? And have you had any support for it from anybody in official ranks?
Your first question first. To my understanding, what Mr. Muhammad has said is that he wants freedom, justice, and equality for the black people here in America, which you agree they don't have. If they did, you wouldn't have a race problem. And he says, if America cannot bring about freedom, justice, and equality for our people in this country, then America should allow us to leave. If we can't get along together, we should be allowed to depart and go someplace where we can set up housekeeping for ourselves. Then he says, if America doesn't want us to go back home among our own people, and at the same time they want to keep us here, since we can't stay here and get along together in peace, he says what America should do is separate part of the country and give us a section where we can live, and give us everything we need to get our particular section functioning independently, support us for 25 years until we are able to function independently in a society of our own, and in this way the problem will be solved.
It's unrealistic. It's not reason enough that the youth would take it from the 7-point program of action.
Can you go through the 7 points quickly?
Please allow me to do that. I thank you. Number 1, the program of action for the Million Youth March 1999 is to end police murder and brutality and the harassment of our people. Point number 2, self-defense of the black community, to build the people's militia as a self-defense unit as the Constitution of white America allows for. Number 3, control of the politics and economics in our communities, build independent political, social, and financial institutions in our community. All realistic goals. Number 4, build independent schools, black liberation schools, community control schools, alternative schools, where we can train and teach our children a proper knowledge of self and education that will lead to a brighter future. One of our sub-themes of the march is saving our youth, securing our future. Black power into the year 2000 is the main one. Number 5, reparations for the descendants of African people enslaved in the United States of America, we have just touched. Number 6, free all political prisoners and prisoners of war. And number 7, self-determination for the black nation. 40 million Africans inside the United States are an oppressed and colonized nation, and our struggle the youth say, and we back them up 100%, and it is our struggle also, is for national liberation.
The most important person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation to come. Steve Jobs.
So, what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this story alive. Until next time, remember, our struggle has always been about the land.